Okay, we're reviewing for the next exam. Remember, the exam doesn't require you to be a genius, but it requires you to master a certain amount of material, and that you can do by planning how you study. Planning to study more is helpful, and planning your study so that you're effective is also very helpful. So, spending lots of time is a really important thing, but also choosing active methods, taking notes, writing, making review sheets, making flashcards, working with a partner, speaking about it. Those are things that help form new memories. Also, plan your time. Don't study in single long sessions. Plan multiple short sessions or take a break over a day so that you can make several study sessions within the same day. That's more effective. Okay, so this section is on evolution by natural selection. It covers chapters 13 through 15. There's some important definitions we'll talk about. Another big topic is the evidence for evolution, then how populations change in alleles, and then we talked about animal evolution in primates and humans. So let's go into some of these definitions and basic concepts. So evolution is genetic change in a population. It's an ongoing process that produces progressive change over long periods of time. Things go from simple to more complex, greater adaptations, and it's a historical process. It builds on what's happened already. Evolution occurs by natural selection. Okay, here described as the differential reproduction of genotypes caused by factors in the environment, and that leads to genetic change in a population. Differential reproduction means some individuals leave more offspring. Okay, and reproduction of genotypes means those individuals differ from other individuals that don't have traits, and those traits are inherited due to genes. And this isn't guided by humans. This is factors in the environment. So organisms become better suited to the environment and leave more offspring. Okay, so we measure this as genetic change within a population of organisms, and that change is measured as a frequency of alleles or what genes are common. This is an ongoing process that produces new species, new adaptations. It's generally slow, but it's been happening for millions and millions of millions of years. Fitness or evolutionary fitness is the ability of an individual to contribute genes to succeeding generations, to leave offspring. So fitness doesn't mean being bigger. It doesn't mean being stronger or more aggressive. It means leaving more offspring. So that might be being better camouflage, being better at finding food, being a better parent, uh, taking care of your offspring longer. Okay. Natural selection requires genetic variation. Um, it requires that individuals vary in physical traits like camouflage, size, feeding, behavior, all sorts of things. And that variation has to be genetic, inherited. Okay. It also requires that there's overproduction of offspring. More individuals are produced than can survive, and individuals have unequal success. Some individuals are more likely to survive and more likely to leave offspring than others. Okay, so those are kind of the basic ideas. What evidence do we have that evolution is a correct idea and that natural selection works? Well, here we have multiple lines of evidence that all support this idea. So that's why we call it a theory, because there's lots of evidence for it. Um, this evidence includes artificial selection or selective breeding in agriculture, from geology, looking at the fossil record and identifying species and their distribution and their age, biogeography, which is the distribution of organisms, living organisms in the environment, whether they're on this continent or that continent or island, comparative anatomy, looking at structures that develop in the same way in different individuals, that's homology, or looking at organs that no longer function in organs, that's vestigial structures or vestigial organs, looking at the development of embryos and molecular biology, DNA sequencing and protein structure. So that's a lot of evidence. The picture there is Archaeopteryx, that's a fossil intermediate. It has features of that no living organism has. It has reptile features like a bony tail, teeth in its jaw, um, separate toes on the hands, but then it also has features of a bird. It has feathers and a wing, so it can fly. So no reptile can do that. Okay, so artificial selection was very, very important for Darwin because there was a long history and it was well known that it worked. You could selectively breed for certain characteristics. Humans would select desirable traits and controlled which individuals would breed, and they could produce rapid change. And this happened very quickly, and it happened in all sorts of organisms. Here shown in dogs, dog breeds, worked with cats, worked with crops like corn and wheat, worked with domestic animals like cattle and sheep and horses. You could select traits that you wanted and produce new breeds very, very quickly, and the breeds could be dramatically different. They were still the same species, but now their characteristics were very, very different. So if it worked for people, it's possible for that in the environment as well. Also important was the fossil record, that it was clear that the Earth was quite old and that we could date rocks by their layers and through radioactive decay, and that fossils definitely showed change over time. The oldest fossils were simple and very, very different from organisms that live now. As you got closer and closer, the organisms appeared more similar, and there were fossil intermediates. It was clear that organisms changed over time and that there were new species appeared and old species disappeared. Really important was the idea of fossil intermediates. Okay, then biogeography, that's a good example of that was Darwin's finches. They were all closely related species of finches, but were definitely different species, had different sized beaks and fed in different areas and had different reproductive cues. Uh, they were on a lot of species here for a very small island. It was unusual that way. But they were similar to species at nearby mainlands. And so this distribution of plants and animals became a really key piece of evidence for Darwin and for Wallace when they were identifying the things, um, evidence. In comparative anatomy, biologists noted similarities in structure due to common descent. These similarities developed from the same tissues in the embryo. Here, all mammals show the same pattern of limb bones developing in the same way in the embryo, and this pattern is similar in reptiles and birds. Likewise, in anatomy, you see vestigial structures, evidence that organisms were um, descended from ancestors that had different lifestyles. So like here, you have hip bones in a whale. No whales have legs, but they do have hip bones. So they probably descended from a organism that did have legs. In molecular biology, we compare the similarity of molecules. We do this with proteins and with DNA, and this correlates well with other anatomical differences and things we know there. Um, and we can see similarities and differences in genes. So how does evolution work in a population? Well, if there if there is no selection or is no um, change in a genetic population, we know that that's because there's a large population, there's no migration in or out, that the mating is random, that there's not a lot of mutation or selection. But if any of these things aren't true, allele frequencies change, and we have formulas where we can represent allele frequencies and we can measure these changes. A good example of this is humans. In humans, in places where malaria is common, this disease causes a change in uh, the genes that produce the red blood cell pigment hemoglobin. Malaria destroys hemoglobin because these parasites attack red blood cells. However, a mutation arose in the areas where this is common that produces a different type of hemoglobin. It doesn't work to transport oxygen as well, but it confers resistance to malaria. The parasites have trouble breaking it down. And wherever malaria occurs, this allele has advantages. And so you see the appearance of this allele wherever you have malaria. And so it's an example of evolution in action. All right, then we covered animals, and I went through the major animal groups. There are two main groups of animals. There's a group of animals that are referred to as protostomes, and their embryos develop in a certain cleavage pattern and certain embryonic development. Um, they have a certain pattern of uh, DNA sequences. And then there's a second animal groups that develop their cleavage differently and their gut differently. And these are the echinoderms and chordates. Chordates are organisms that all have a nerve cord, and the nerve cord is eventually dorsal to a notochord, which is a support rod that's in some animals replaced by a vertebral column. Chordate embryos show pharyngeal slits that develop into gills in many of the fish and fish-like organisms. In other organisms, this will develop into structures in the neck and jaws and things like that. And then they show a post-anal tail. Okay. We talked about human evolution. Human evolution, we are clearly chordates. We show these features in our embryo. We are clearly mammals. We have the mammal features of hair. Our young develop with the help of a placenta, and we nourish them after birth with mammary glands. We are also primates. We have all the main primate features like opposable thumbs, fingernails, forward-facing eyes, and big brains. And we are closely related to a couple fossil intermediates, like Neanderthals or Homo erectus, uh, animals that have craniums nearly as large as ours, but much larger than chimpanzees. Their remains are found with tools. They're clearly also bipeds like us. They walked upright on two legs. And then the genetic evidence has linked us to those organisms. So I'll stop there and I'll post